We all ready?
I love it.
I call this meeting to order. Madam Clerk, can we get a roll call, please?
Fenton.
Here.
Denham.
Here.
Cooper.
Here.
Milton.
Here.
Howden.
Here.
Rodriguez.
Here.
LeBlanc.
Here.
Your Honor, you have a quorum.
So this study session will stay open while the TDD meeting is taking place. TDD Property Owners Business Meeting Guide. So I'm calling this joint meeting is now called to order. Madam Clerk, would you repeat the roll call in case it changed?
Yes, sir. Fenton.
Here.
Denham.
Here.
Cooper.
Here.
Milton.
Still here.
Howden.
Here.
Rodriguez.
Here.
LeBlanc.
Here.
Your Honor, you have a quorum for the property owners of the Branson Landing Transportation Development District meeting.
Thank you. We'll start off with an approval of the minutes of July 26th, 2022 TDD Property Owners Meeting. I'll now entertain a motion to approve the minutes of the Property Owners Meeting on July 26, 2022.
So moved. Second.
We have a motion and a second. Any discussion from the Aldermen? Hearing none, Madam Clerk, would you call a roll call vote, please?
We could just do a voice vote if you wanted to.
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign.
Mayor, you also can vote on this one too.
Aye.
Excellent.
Ayes
The
have it.
result of the vote is 7-0. Motion carries.
It's gonna be a long night, gentlemen. Next, we move on to the election of 3 members of the Board of Directors of the Branson Landing Transportation Development District. I will now entertain a motion to vote 61 of the city's shares to elect Mayor Larry Milton, 61 shares to elect Alderman Ruth Denham, and 61 shares to elect Alderman Cody Fenton to the Board of Directors of the Branson Landing TDD, each for a 3-year term that will expire April 26.
So moved. Second.
We have a motion and a second. Any discussion from the Board of Aldermen? Hearing none, let's vote. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign.
The result of the vote is 7-0. Motion carries. Let the record reflect that the city, as the sole property owner within the Branson Landing TDD, has elected Mayor Larry Milton, Alderman Ruth Denham, and Alderman Cody Fenton to the Board of Directors of the Branson Landing TDD, each with 3-year terms that will expire April 2026.
So that concludes the item scheduled for the Branson Landing TDD Property Owners Meeting. I will now entertain a motion to adjourn the Property Owners Meeting.
So moved. Second.
We have a motion and a second. Any discussion? Hearing none, voice, all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign.
The result of the vote is 7-0. Motion carries.
So the meeting of the Branson Landing TDD Property Owners is adjourned. This is a meeting of the Board of Directors, Branson Landing Transportation Development District. The joint meeting of the Board of Directors for the Branson Landing Transportation Development District is now called to order. Didn't we just adjourn that?
You adjourn the property owners meeting, and now you're doing the Board of Directors meeting.
I knew that.
Two separate meetings.
Well, sounds like we need another roll call.
Yes, you do. Fenton.
Still here.
Denham.
Here.
Cooper.
Here.
Milton.
Yep.
Howden.
Here.
Rodriguez.
Here.
LeBlanc.
Yep.
Your Honor, you have a quorum for the Board of Directors meeting of the Branson Landing Transportation Development District.
So the first item on the agenda is approval of minutes. I will now entertain a motion to approve the TDD Board of Director meeting minutes of July 26, 2022.
So moved. Second.
We have a motion and a second. Any discussion from the board? Hearing none, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. Ayes have it. Madam Secretary, would you please provide the introduction for this item?
Your Honor, this is Resolution 2023-01, a resolution of the Board of Directors of the Branson Landing Transportation Development District appointing officers of the district.
Do I have a motion appointing officers and adopting the resolution?
Where'd my paper go? Is that my cue? Ready? You want me to do all those? Right
If
there,
you'd
right?
like
That's
to.
it. Those are the current members. It is up to you if you want to keep them or put somebody else in.
I mean, do I need to go through each one of those that you just selected? Okay.
Yes, please.
I move to approve,
Appoint.
yeah, that's what it says. Ruth Denham as chairperson and executive director. Ralph LeBlanc as vice chairperson. Marshall Howden as secretary, and who is that? Chuck Rodriguez as treasurer, and adopt resolution 2023-01.
Do I have a second?
Second.
Any discussion from the board? We'll do a voice vote. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. Ayes have it. Madam Secretary, would you please provide the introduction for this item?
Your Honor, this is Resolution 2023-02, a resolution of the Board of Directors of the Branson Landing Transportation Development District approving the budget for the fiscal year ending December 31st, 2024.
Do I have a motion adopting Resolution 2023-02?
So, second.
We have a motion and a second. Any discussion from the board? Hearing none, let's vote. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. Ayes have it. Having no other business to come before the Board of Directors, that concludes the meeting of the Board of Directors for the Branson Landing Transportation Development District. I will now entertain a motion to adjourn the meeting.
So moved. Second.
We have a motion and a second. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign.
That was an aye.
I'm sorry, is there a nay?
I missed the first.
Oh, let's go back then. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. Ayes have it. The meeting of the Board of Directors for the Branson Landing Transportation Development District is adjourned. Thank you all for coming. We'll see you next week. Next, we'll get a presentation of elected official training by Joe Lauber. Hello, Joe.
Hello. Good afternoon, Mayor, members of the board. Make sure Okay. So I'm here to present to you today part two of a two-part Board of Aldermen training. We started back on July 11th, if you can all remember back that far. Sometimes it's difficult, seems like a year ago already. Today's presentation will start out with some municipal law basics that we didn't get to last month, and then we're going to dive into the kind of the 201 session subject matter, which involves the roles and responsibilities of elected officials and city staff. Okay, here we go. So initially with the municipal law basics, keep in mind that in Missouri, not all cities are created equal. Cities they are different by their structure in many ways, and there are basically two types of cities in Missouri, major types, and that would be there are home rule charter cities that gather their authority straight from the charter, from the Missouri Constitution, and then there are statutory cities. Branson is a statutory city. We gather our power from the state statutes that were passed by the General Assembly, and as a fourth-class city, we find all of our powers in Chapter 79. It's the most common type of city in Missouri. At the time of formation, the city had to be between 500 and 3,000 in population. If over, once it's formed, if the city goes, in or out of that frame, they can still remain a fourth-class city. Fourth-class cities have a mayor and board of aldermen. That's the system that you're familiar with, but you'll hear other cities talk about their city council or their city manager in certain circumstances. Those are actually different cities if they're using those terms correctly. The statutes authorize fourth-class cities to hire a city administrator. And when cities have availed themselves of that power, then the city administrator sits essentially as the assistant to the mayor. And so if you remember from our last training, even at the local government level, we have the separation of powers. We have the legislative branch, which is the Board of Aldermen. We have the executive or the administrative branch, which is the mayor and the city administrator, and then city staff fulfills the administrative roles. And then we, of course, have our judicial branch, which is our municipal court. In fourth-class cities, the statute sets up that mayors only vote in the case of ties. They sit in the Board of Aldermen, but they preside over meetings, and then they only vote in the case of ties. And as I mentioned, the specific statutes that govern fourth-class cities are found at Chapter 79. Another item I would like to just go over as a brief review on some of the municipal law basics is the difference between ordinances and resolutions. There is a distinction between the two. Ordinances are legislative acts of a governing body. So when you as a board adopt an ordinance, you are setting a law for the city. Sometimes those laws are just simply providing authority for someone to sign a document or to proceed in a certain way. Sometimes you're amending your code of ordinances, which is a way to organize your ordinances to make them easy to find, easy to amend, easy for the public to follow. In that circumstance, you guys all have a code. I do have some cities that we represent that don't have a code. They're, the city clerk has all of the ordinances in a shoebox under their bed or something like that. It can be kind of maddening sometimes when we don't have a city code. So I'm thankful that you all have a city code. When you pass an ordinance, again, you have created a new local law, a new authority for local government agents to act. Resolutions, on the other hand, they're more administrative acts of a governing body. They're typically a mere expression of opinion. What I will tell you is, procedurally, there's really no distinction between a resolution and an approved motion. There's case law in Missouri that talks about the fact that, in fact, that resolutions actually are truly only effective during the term of the legislature that passed it. Okay, so if we're thinking about the General Assembly, it's pretty easy, in Missouri to know what the term of the legislature is. It opens every year in January. It closes on May 15th every year, and so that's kind of defined, and we understand that. Does anybody have an idea as to what is the term of the legislature in local governments in Missouri, at least in statutory cities like Branson?
Perpetuity.
Well, actually each year, though, does create a legislative session, and that legislative session runs from the time between the elections. So if you are familiar, remember back in April, we did an act where we did the adjournment sine die. We talked about, that was the shift of the legislative session from the session that ended in April of 2023 and then runs through from now, the latter part of April of 2023 until 2024. And so, when we pass resolutions, technically, they don't have any authority beyond that. And it's okay, because a lot of times there's a question about, maybe we we authorize the signature of an ordinance by resolution or something like that. Does that affect, the timing of the ordinance? No, because the resolution is authorizing an act that is finite in time. It is authorizing someone to sign this contract, and once the contract is signed, it no longer has a need to be out there and available.
So, excuse me, Joe.
Yes, sir.
So as we go from elections through election cycles, past the previous resolutions, do those need to be readopted, that they're no longer in effect?
Typically, when we write resolutions, and that's something I work with the city clerk on, is we write them in a way that they shouldn't need to be ongoing in that way. They approved something in a point of time. Now, it might depend upon, whether you're actually passing, if you're passing a law, that does have to be done by ordinance for a more standing effect. But essentially, many times a resolution only needs, an authority to say, like for right now, we're going to set the rate schedule for the city, and that resolution approves it at that point and until it needs to be changed again or something like that as an example.
Interesting.
I have a question. So special use permits are approved via resolution since they don't come to the Board of Aldermen. So should they all be date specific?
So in that circumstance, that is, you have set that up, you've delegated that authority to the planning commission, and planning commissions cannot act by ordinance because they are not legislative bodies, they're administrative bodies, and so they will act by resolution in that circumstance. But again, that's an approval in a point in time. When an application was brought forward, that application was based on facts at the time that the application came forward. You can approve it, and provided that they don't fall outside typically the facts of the special use permit, then it will stay in effect, at that point in time. And they typically they're not perpetual. I believe they do have, most special use permits have some sort of an end date on them.
Thanks.
Yep.
Joe?
Yes.
So let's say there's a resolution where the board or the mayor under his current administration wants to lay out, the thought process on something that, I think back we had a resolution that talked about being fiscally responsible, things like that.
Sure.
Is there precedent for at the beginning after you do the Synodia kind of thing to maybe approve a slate of resolutions that you want to continue ongoing during the current mayoral administration or if they're the same board members there or?
I don't know that I would say that there's necessarily a precedent to it, but it's not a bad idea. I haven't really seen too many cities do that type of thing, but that would make sense. If the Board of Aldermen in its new composition said, these are certain things we want to accomplish. I don't know that I would recommend necessarily doing them at the meeting where, you do the adjournment synodia, because at that point, maybe the board hasn't had an opportunity to kind of gel, but, it wouldn't be a terrible idea to maybe say, if we're going to, start a new legislation every April, that maybe by mid or end of May, or maybe even into June at some point, we set a legislative agenda for what we're trying to accomplish for the remaining part of that legislative year. Not a bad idea. It's a good planning. It actually fits really well with the conversation we're going to have later today about policy setting versus, the actual administration of the city. So it's a great segue. Okay, just a little bit more on resolutions. I kind of already covered some of this. Deals with matters of special or temporary character. A lot of times, if you want to, like in the pictures here, recognize a scout for becoming an Eagle Scout. The top picture, I think, is the mayor of Belton, Missouri, back when Tate Stevens won whatever award or whatever show he was on, and they were putting his name on the water tower and stuff up there. They were just recognizing somebody in the community. You guys do that, and I think you have a recognition this evening that you're going to be talking about. There is one exception to the resolution requirements, if you will. We've talked about it this year. It's something that we have adopted since I became the city attorney, and that is there is a statutory requirement that before you make a change to an adopted budget, you are required to pass a resolution that state the facts and reasons for the justification for that. It really doesn't change anything because, again, that's a finite point in time, but there is a statutory requirement that you must do a resolution for that manner before you can do an amendment to your budget by ordinance in that circumstance. Resolutions don't have any formalities of procedure, which is different than ordinances. There is no mayoral veto power over resolutions, and there is no requirement that you record the ayes and nays, which are all things that you have to do for ordinances, and we'll cover that here in just a minute.
Excuse me, Joe.
Yes, sir.
So as we move forward, when we have budget amendments, will we now start seeing a resolution before the budget amendment?
You have already been doing that since about April, where we started doing the resolution stating facts and reasons for the necessity for the
They
budget
just
change.
weren't in a fancy piece of paper and a plaque.
Yep.
Got it.
Okay, so what are the ordinance requirements? Well, first of all, they have to be adopted by a legally existing government body. Well, that seems like common sense, but you wouldn't believe, we have run into it in our career where people have kind of deemed themselves the sheriff of whatever or the mayor of whatever, and it's not even really an incorporated city or village or town, and they're going off and trying to enact ordinances. You can't do that. Got to go through those processes as well. The governing for ordinances, the governing body has to have have the power to act. You have to have legal authority to act. You, as a board of aldermen, cannot declare war on China no more than you can stop the jab. You don't have authority to act in those circumstances, and those are things that you cannot pass an ordinance about. Ordinances must have a yes, sir. I'm sorry.
For clarity, I just want to make sure, so we can't pass something to stop the jab?
Correct.
Thank you.
Ordinances must have a reasonable, definite, and certain term, yes, it must have reasonable, definite, and certain terms, and they have to be adopted requiring the form and using the proper procedure. There may be people who come to these meetings, maybe you, when you first became an alderman, were wondering, why in the heck do we have to read these things over and over again at these meetings? And that's because there are statutory requirements for the reading of ordinances, at least by title only, in order for them to be properly approved. All ordinances have to be in harmony with the Constitution and existing laws. You can't, like right now, you couldn't, regulate recreational marijuana use in a way that's contrary to the constitutional provisions that were passed last November. And so we have to, those are the types of things we keep an eye on when we're looking at passing ordinances, or if you ask us to take a look at an ordinance, how do we determine, the best way to do that. Also, ordinances must serve a public purpose. So you can't pass ordinances that help yourself out, help out, your neighbor or whatever. What we do as a legislative body is we affect the city as a whole. We don't deal with individual persons, with what we do as a legislature. That's beyond our scope. That's what administration is about. We set a path, and then administration carries it out. Okay, and that's where we start to jump into the various roles of individuals at the city level. So sorry, I forgot all these. We're in here. I think that's it. Okay, so let's first talk about what are the statutory roles for a Board of Aldermen. So you can see here at the top of the screen, 79.110. That's a reference to where we find these requirements or these responsibilities in state statutes. And you remember I said Chapter 79 is our chapter, and that's where you find it. So this is basically paraphrased out of 79.110, and it says, along with the mayor, the Board of Aldermen has the care, management, and control of the city and its finances, and shall have the power to enact and ordain any and all ordinances not repugnant to the Constitution and laws of this state, and such as they shall deem expedient for the good government of the city, which includes the preservation of peace and good order, the benefit of trade and commerce, and the health of inhabitants thereof, and any other such ordinances, rules, and regulations as may be deemed necessary to carry such powers into effect, and to alter, modify, or repeal those ordinances as you have approved them. So if you recall back to July, remember we talked about Dylan's rule, is that real old guy with the long sideburns or the beard or whatever it was that he had. It was Judge Dillon from Iowa. And Judge Dillon passed, the case that talked about what municipal powers, what powers do a municipality have. And they have those powers that are expressly written into state statutes or the Constitution, and then only those powers that are necessarily incident to those powers. And we remember my example of that was, there's no way that the legislature is going to pass a statute that says that the city of Branson may put a stop sign at the corner of, Main and whatever, right? They're going to say the city of Branson has the authority to regulate traffic within its jurisdictional boundaries, and then incidental to that necessarily, you have the authority then to say where in your city those things will be done, okay? There's also a very long list of other statutes in Chapter 79. It goes anywhere from .370 to .480 that, lay out, all kinds of different things. And some of them are pretty old and they kind of get hilarious sometimes about, talking about regulation of hucksters or, different things like that. I don't think there's any spitting on the sidewalk stuff in there anymore, but that does go with health and welfare. So, okay, so that we talked about the statutory role of the Board of Aldermen, but let's also talk about the practical role of the Board of Aldermen. Went too far, sorry. We'll go back. There we go. So practically, when we're carrying out those powers, what are the things that we need to do? Well, number one, an alderman is elected to represent the public, right? So you have been put into those seats to speak on behalf of the constituents of your ward, okay? Your responsibility practically is to develop and evaluate policies and programs for the direction of the city. You have a responsibility as an alderman to help maintain fiscal integrity, right? Make sure that, money is being spent, and you're being good stewards of public funds. You have a responsibility as an alderman to say, what type of services do we want our city to provide? These are very big picture type items, right? As to, what, and really when it boils down to it, what are municipal services about? They're about being able to provide services to the community where it makes sense that individuals shouldn't have to individually pay for them. Can you imagine a world that we live in where fires only get put out if someone can pay the correct fee to get the fire put out, okay? That roads only get paved in front of the houses that people that can afford to pay to have that road fixed in front of their house. The bad guys only get picked up because they robbed people that could pay a certain fee. So those things, it makes sense for us to find a collective way to provide services for everybody in a community and share the costs of that. And that's really, kind of what we're about. And finally, a practical role of aldermen is to ensure accountability and transparency for the actions of the local government. Keep in mind that an individual alderman has very little and maybe no power by themselves.
Hold on, could you repeat that for the people in the back of the room?
Individual
Way in the
aldermen
back.
have little or no power by themselves. Ultimately, the Board of Aldermen has all of the power. And so what I mean by that is you can't be that little yellow fish in the middle of the arrow there, right? In order for an alderman to get things done, you have to be a consensus builder and you have to work within your own governing body with your colleagues on this dais to get things done. And so sometimes I will have, clients, I'll have individual aldermen come to me and say, I need you to do this, I need you to do that. And, without being rude, what my response kind of has to be is, I can't just answer to an individual alderman. If you have a question or you want something resolved, what I need is for that individual alderman to go to the mayor or to go to the city administrator and ask that an item be put on the agenda so that the board can get together and discuss whether or not that is something that needs to be done. And I've learned, as a much younger, less experienced municipal attorney, that if you're not careful about that, that's a way that bills really get run up because everybody's off doing their own thing. And, and then at some point someone says, whoa, who asked for this? And then you have to stop and be like, oh, yeah, I should have made sure that the board, together was making a decision about this. So it's important from that standpoint.
Joe, to that first statement, where does that confusion come in? Because I hear that all the time.
I'm sorry?
The confusion on individual aldermen have little or no power. I think the perception is that people believe that it's individual and not a collective board. And we know that we operate as a board. So where does that kind of get muddied in perception, I guess?
It's a very interesting question, and I find myself asking that, kind of a lot. And I mean, my personal opinion, maybe professional opinion on that is that unfortunately, I think people have gotten away from, maybe whether it was their civics class in, school or, the understanding of how government truly works is a big piece of it. I think it's incumbent upon cities, city staffs, and even the elected officials to make sure that they understand how this works, and so that they can be talking with constituents that come to them, and say, if they say, I demand that you fix this pothole in front of my house tomorrow, that someone be able to say, hey, I appreciate you letting me know about that. I need to take that back, and I'll take that to the mayor, and I'll take that to the city administrator, and I'll ask them to get with the public works staff to find out, what's going on, but by myself, I cannot direct someone from city staff to go out and fill that pothole tomorrow. And when it really boils down to it, and I think, maybe another thing that kind of leads to, that question, the answer to the question that you asked is that while, many of us might know a state rep or a state senator, or maybe even, a United States congressman or senator, United States senator. I think that there's a much more of, and there should be, right, a familiarity with our local elected officials, and so maybe they just feel more comfortable coming to you and saying, hey, I need to get this done. But in the end, it's incumbent on all of us to make sure that the public fully understands how, local government does work, and that there is a process that we have to go through. Because I think if we do a good job of that, then there'll be less disappointment from, citizens that don't get that immediate, satisfaction on a particular issue, that they have to understand that there is a process that we go through. And again, we'll get into this in more detail as we go, but for at least the aldermen, so I'll separate out the mayor and the city administrator, but at least the aldermen, your job is very high level, very big picture. It's policy based. It's not the day-to-day operation of the city. Your job is to say, here's where the city is today. Where do we want to be in a year, in 5 years, and in 30 years? Because as we'll talk about is, this city has been in existence longer than all of us. And we hope that it will be in existence longer than we will be around. Right now, we're holding a baton. That baton was handed to us by your predecessors in office. And you can go down here in the hallway in the foyer and look at how far back that goes. And you're just carrying that torch today, and you're passing it on to the next generation of elected officials who come here. And so in the end, we think about, like, what we're talking about today is how, as elected officials, do we start to set our mindset in a way that prepares us to say, this is what our legacy is, this is the baton that we're going to pass to the next group, and how things are going to be better as we go forward in that. So probably stole a little bit of my thunder already, but I'm passionate about this kind of stuff, and so I can't help but it gets out. So. Okay, so back on our theme of looking at statutory roles. Again, I'm so sorry about all this. Did it again. So first of all, let's talk about, for the next item, let's talk about the statutory role of mayors in the fourth class. So as I mentioned before, the mayor sits on the board of aldermen, but only votes to break a tie. The mayor presides at Board of Aldermen meetings, so they have control of the meeting, the decorum of the meeting, the flow of the meeting, and so forth. Jointly, the mayor and the board, as I stated before, this comes from a similar statute there, have the care and management and control of the city and its finances. And the mayor shall exercise a general supervision over all of the officers and affairs of the city. The mayor shall be active and vigilant in enforcing the laws and ordinance for the government of the city. The mayor is to make recommendations to the Board of Aldermen to improve the city. The mayor actually has the authority to pardon individuals who have been convicted of city violations, and the mayor does have the authority to veto bills. I'm going to decide here if I need to go into that one further or not. Yeah, so I can talk just a moment about veto since we're on that subject matter. So one of the things I'll say is you may have heard of a pocket veto before, if you remember back to, earlier discussions, or maybe that civics class I just mentioned. Pocket vetoes are a situation where if the executive of the governing body of whatever it is, if they do not sign an ordinance, it is automatically vetoed. Missouri is not set up for pocket veto. So if the mayor either fails to or refuses to sign an ordinance after it's been passed by the Board of Aldermen at a meeting, at the start of the next regularly scheduled meeting, then that ordinance becomes effective without the mayor's signature on it. Okay, so there is no pocket veto. If a mayor chooses to veto a bill or an ordinance that has been approved by the Board of Aldermen, the mayor has to state in writing the reasons for that, and basically has to state that he or she is vetoing the bill. And then that bill comes back for a supermajority vote and can then be approved by a supermajority vote of the Board of Aldermen if they want to override the veto. Okay, there is no line item veto in Missouri, so you can't say, I don't really like this section of the ordinance, I'm going to veto it. If you don't like something, you have to veto the entire thing in that way. So I thought I would just cover that just briefly.
And just quickly, when the board approves a ordinance to be signed, when you say supermajority, it's the same number, right? 4 out of the 6 is a supermajority. So if 4 approve it, mayor doesn't sign it, you still only need 4 aldermen to approve that.
Right, but an ordinance could, and I guess maybe this is beside the point as I think about it, but a bill could be passed with a 3-3 tie and the mayor votes to break the tie. But in that circumstance, if you vote to break the tie and you decide not to sign the ordinance, and you may still be able to actually veto the ordinance, before it is ultimately, before the next meeting begins.
I just want to clarify that a supermajority is the same 4 out of
Yes, I
the
believe
6
so.
board.
Yep,
Hey, Joe,
yes.
is it
Sorry.
in statute, the number of aldermen and like redistricting if we get a whole new slew, right?
Yes. So you have to have a minimum of 2 wards in a 4th-class city, and each ward has to have 2 members. If you decide to expand upon that, then you need to put that to a vote of the people. And since I'm kind of in the neighborhood of that also, you are a 4th-class city today. There is a process for you to become a charter city if that is something that you would be interested in. We're actually working on that with a couple different of our clients at this time who are considering that type of a move. And there's a whole process for that, but certainly that's an option as well for 4th-class cities and 3rd-class cities for that matter. So again, focusing on the mayor's role, board members should meet with the mayor routinely to discuss ideas or concerns. We've talked about kind of this in maybe sometimes a sunshine law concept, but what I would say is that it makes ultimate sense, and I think it's prudent government for the mayor and the city administrator to have a good feel for where their elected officials are on various items, okay? And that may come in a one-on-one conversation. You may be out at a grocery store and someone grabs you by the sleeve of your shirt and starts chewing you out about this, that, or the other thing, and you may go have a conversation with the mayor or the city administrator in that circumstance to say, hey, this is an issue, okay? And so the mayor and the city administrator should hopefully, be keeping a tally someplace to say, oh my gosh, that's like the 3rd time that someone has caught one of the elected officials about this issue. Clearly, this is a problem. We need to be moving this up the priority of things to focus on. And so there should be communications. What I'm always very cautious to say is be aware and do not ever create what's called a serial meeting, okay? So if there's a conversation, maybe Mayor or Kathy in that circumstance where you're talking with, Alderman Cooper, and then, you end up speaking with Alderman Denham, do not in that circumstance say, oh, well, I happen to be speaking with Alderman Cooper, and this is how he feels about this. How do you feel? Because by the time you add that up and we now have 4 aldermen with that story, we have created what is called a serial meeting, and that is in violation of the Sunshine Law, okay? That having been said, though, provided that you're not, and I always kind of refer to that as being the bee that pollinates the flowers, right? So do not be the bee that pollinates the flowers. But individually, the mayor and the city administrator, I think if they're doing their job well, should be communicating individually with you so that they know what the issues are and they start to see a trend that they can, have a discussion and say, hey, this is something we need to put on the agenda. This is something that's coming up, okay? Or, they need to, get a feel for that so that we can put that on the agenda and conduct public business in that way. That's just one way to do it. The other thing I will tell you is it's perfectly fine for aldermen to have those kind of discussions too. But again, do not have a serial meeting. In that circumstance, if you know that you feel a certain kind of way about something and you know that, one or two of your other colleagues, that's at a point where you probably say, hey, like in the back of your mind, I know that this is something that's important. I'm going to approach the mayor, I'm going to approach the city administrator about getting this issue on the agenda so we can have, public business about it, okay? And that's kind of how we take the grassroots information that we gather from our constituents and bring it to, this place where we do the public business. The mayor should work closely with the city administrator to move the board's goals forward, to anticipate issues that are upcoming on the horizon, and to manage the action of the Board of Aldermen meetings. And all of this works most effectively if the mayor understands board's concerns and shares this feedback with the city administrator. So I don't need to read through all of this, but this is a sample roll of governing body members. And I just wanted to point out that this, isn't even a governing body in the United States. This happens to be a Canadian governing body, but essentially all of the points that they raise in, that role of governing body members is absolutely applicable, right here in Branson, Missouri, not Kingston, Canada, per se. So now let's talk about the statutory role of city administrator. So you'll note here, do you see that 77 right there? 77.042. So weirdly, and this is the life that I get to live, is the authority for a fourth-class city to have a city administrator is actually found in Chapter 77, which deals with third-class cities. And you see that the second bullet point, or the first one underneath the heading there says the governing body of ... any fourth-class city. Well, what's in that ... is any third-class city or any fourth-class city. So the authority is found there, but nevertheless, it is still authority for fourth-class cities to adopt the city administrator form of government. When a board of aldermen makes a decision to create the city administrator form of government, they are essentially saying, we want to delegate some of our authority and we want to share some of the authority of the mayor, and we want to move that to a person who essentially is an in-house, 24/7 probably, right, Kathy? 24/7 administrator who is working to carry out the goals of the Board of Aldermen in the administration of the city. So if you so choose and your predecessors so chose to have a city administrator, you then may by ordinance provide for the employment by the governing body with the approval of the mayor of a city administrator, who shall be the chief administrative assistant to the mayor and who shall have general superintending control of the administration and management of the government business, officers and employees of the city, subject to the direction and supervision of the mayor. So when I've talked in the past before about the connection between mayor and city administrator, they are designed to be a team by statute and by ordinance, a team to carry out the administration of the city's business, which essentially is how do we take the high-level goals set by the governing body and put them into action, in a day-to-day practice of the city's operations. So what is the role of staff? It's a little fantastic. If you all didn't know, I think it was last Tuesday, was City Hall Selfie Day. So this is your staff on City Hall Selfie Day. People all over the country were participating in this. So what is the role of staff? Well, staff is there to offer professional advice, okay? I don't want to offend you, but you all are elected officials, and you all have jobs outside of this role. You're probably not, relying on that giant check that you get as alderpersons and a mayor to, put food on your table. Your city staff, however, they're professionals, right? This is their calling in life. They've gone to school to learn how to run cities and to do their piece of it. This is how they put food on their family's table. This is how they put their kids through college. And our design as staff is that we are here to provide you with the information that you need to make the best decisions possible for this city. And we are there to be a useful tool for you to gather that information. If you're ever in a situation where you feel like you don't have enough information, then that's something that we need to get to the mayor, to the city administrator, to say, hey, we feel like this is lacking, we need some additional information on this, and can we dig that up? And we'll go a little bit further into this as we go this afternoon, but that's the first place I want to touch on that is understand that these people are here to be to provide that service to you, and likewise they're providing the services to your constituents to make sure that we're doing the best job possible as the governing body of the city of Branson. Another role of staff is we implement the board's decisions, right? So we provide advice to say, hey, these are the facts of the situation. This is what's going on. Here are some, legal pitfalls. Here's the financial concern of it. Here, if we don't do it, here are the consequences. This is the information you need to make a decision. And we'll say of these three choices, we recommend, the middle one because of these reasons, okay? Now, as a board of aldermen, you have complete discretion to say, well, I don't think so much that I wanted to go this other direction and maybe here's why, or anyway, so it looked like you may have a question, so.
Joe, you talk about the three branches of government.
Yes.
Even on the municipal level. So what would happen if the Board of Aldermen passed an ordinance and then whether it was the administration or city staff didn't enact that or sort of purposely subverted that ordinance?
That it's not necessarily at the discretion of the administration to do that. I think, if you had that circumstance, that might be, a reason to certainly bring it to the mayor's attention, the city administrator's attention, or the city attorney's attention, so it can be reviewed, from that, whether or not there's, actual, is there, what would be the reasons behind them doing that?
Let's say they disagreed with the board's direction, and they purposely subverted a piece of legislation at the board. I mean, has there ever been a legal resource, and this is completely hypothetical, but has there ever been like a legal recourse that a board would have against city staff or administration?
I don't know of any legal recourse, but essentially, in the end, the mayor, has the control over, the overall superintending control of the city, and at certain levels, then the mayor and the board of aldermen do have some termination power. But I think from that standpoint, if the board votes to go a certain direction, and even if something were needed to be called into line, that maybe would be a situation where it gets put on the agenda, it's discussed, and then as we like I move that we direct staff to do X or Y, in light of that. I mean, it's this kind of paints it a little bit in kind of more of the negative connotation. That doesn't mean that it doesn't ever exist in that connotation, but on the positive side of it, you do that all of the time, when you say, well, I want to direct, that we, pass an ordinance to do this, that, or the other thing. So, I don't see those things being that much different, so. The next role for staff would be to establish sound administrative practices. So, again, as aldermen, we have, a direction of let's go do, staff, we want you to go do, and then it's the staff's responsibility to say, how do we do that? They create the forms, they create the process, those types of things to carry out what it is that the board is looking to do from a on the day-to-day implementation of various authority. And then finally, staff's role is to maintain the operations of the municipality. They're the ones making sure that, streets get plowed and bad guys get put in jail and things like that. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about kind of public administration 101, and this is kind of, again, that idea of the big picture that, the elected official, especially the legislative body, should be looking at versus, how that works through, the legislature and the administration, and then the actual day-to-day operations of the city. So, unfortunately, many governing bodies find themselves operating really more at levels, 2 or 3, which is where they start, they want to get into the operational control and the management control. But truly, legislative bodies, when they're working at their utmost ability, they should be working in level 4, the strategic planning. If hopefully there's not very much time spent in level 1 by elected officials, but I always have this story that I like to tell where I was working in a city, and it wasn't very long after the election, and I'd gone in and people were chatting before the meeting started, and one council member was talking to some of the others, and they were talking about how they were out on some job site, and they there was a clog in a pipe, and the council member was talking about how he had his arm up this pipe, and I was like, whoa, stop, whoa, what is going on here? You are an elected official of the city. You should never have your arm in a pipe, of the cities. Like, that is not what we do. We have people to do that. Like, get your arm out of the pipe. And when I tell that story sometimes, it's like I can kind of look at you and be like, you got your arm in the pipe again. So, think about that, as, again, we hire professional staff to carry out your desires, but, in the end, we got to let them do their job once we've said, this is we want sewer laid on, certain street, then we're done with our piece of it. That then becomes the responsibility. Well, sewer laid on this street, and we make sure we've budgeted money for it, right? Those are the really big picture things. And then we let the administration take care of it. Whoops. So this is kind of, another pyramid there, but, the ideal board should be working, at high levels to organize, surveys for, continuous improvements. You're looking for what's the big picture, the feeling that you're getting from your constituents as to the direction that the city should go in, and then, carry that out. Where a lot of boards do operate is kind of, really focused on individual constituent response. And while that's important and it's good customer service, if you have individual constituents that have issues, really, you should be a conduit in that situation to say, hey, I hear what you're saying. Let me get this to people at the city staff, and let's get it resolved. And I'll follow up with you, and I'll follow up with, the mayor and the city administrator to make sure this was taken care of. But, really, if you're trying to resolve individual constituents' issues, you kind of have your arm up the pipe a little bit, So give the staff the notice that something needs to be taken care of. And sometimes what you'll find is maybe, what you heard wasn't the whole story. Maybe, there was a little more context to the situation that is better explained once all of the facts are known. So bad boards, should not have their arm in the pipe. They should not be involved bad boards will be involved in the day-to-day operations. So, keep that in mind. We do have administration to carry out that stuff. Here's a different way of kind of approaching it. And this is an analogy. It was actually put out by the City Managers Association, the National Association for City Managers, and it's kind of an interesting that flight analogy where if you look at the screen here, you've got, if you see the bars that are horizontal there that are green and white, and as they go from left to right across the screen, the green gets a little bit smaller till it's almost all white there. And if you look up above, there's a little key that says, the green is council responsibility and the white is staff responsibility. And then so we look at the big picture approach and we say that, to the far left, that blue box says purpose and vision. And you see the bar at the bottom, that's a long range planning issue. And that is, very much a council goal. Your role in that circumstance is to affirm the vision, the purpose, set that direction. And this, I think, starts to fall right into what you were suggesting before is, maybe each year there should be a time when you set your legislative agenda for that year, and this would be a place to set that purpose and that vision, and then be able to check on it maybe quarterly or, as you go throughout the year, so that, when the time comes, towards the end of the legislative session is, did we get everything accomplished that we wanted to accomplish? And you're already maybe teeing up a little bit for the next one, but, you have to make sure you have all the members on board, at that time in case there's a change in, like maybe who runs for office, who gets elected, and so forth. So from the 50,000 feet at purpose and vision, we also, then we move to 40,000 feet, the strategic goals. And so there, the council's role is to establish what those goals are, where staff should align the goals with the resources that the city has, whether those are human resources or financial resources. We hope to start to line those up from that standpoint. You drop down a little further to 30,000 feet, we start listing what are the priority action items in order to accomplish that purpose and vision and those goals that we've addressed. And you see here, it's still pretty heavy. It's skewed more towards council responsibility, but staff is starting to, get more engaged in this piece of it. And this is where, again, you as a board of aldermen would establish and prioritize the action items you want to see accomplished in order to get that purpose and that vision and those goals taken care of. And staff at that same time will be implementing priority action items. So, if you guys have, these are the things we need to knock out, and first, staff will start saying, okay, well, in order for us to do this, this is what we'll tell you is, it's gonna take these many dollars or this kind of time, or, we'll need to, have, buy this equipment or whatever the case may be. The plane is getting closer to the ground. We get to planning and oversight at 20,000 feet. And there's the first time where you kind of shift to see where, staff's role is really the bigger role, but you're still involved as a council from that standpoint. And so your role at that point becomes reviewing and adopting budget and conducting meetings where we're passing, whether it's ordinances to approve contracts or ordinances that need to change, how, what our policies are as a city as to, what needs to be being enforced out there. You're doing that. And staff at that time is preparing plans and overseeing functions of the city to carry that out. And we get closer, we're at projects at 10,000 feet. Again, the city council role starts to diminish even a little bit more, and staff begins to take over. At that point, when we're in, that's, if we're dealing with individual projects, you're looking at things like, maybe, depending on whatever your purchasing policy may say, maybe you're approving, those bigger contracts that are required to carry out, a project, whereas staff is planning and completing the projects. And then ultimately we hit the runway, and that's the day-to-day work on the ground that's being done out there to carry it out. And so in that circumstance, your role as a council is, like now it's running based off of the stuff that you did back at 50,000 feet, that purpose and that vision, and now it's happening. And so you're engaging with the community to get feedback from your constituents about, that direction that we set. Are we headed in the right direction? Are people happy with what we're doing? We're giving feedback to staff about that. And staff is actually out there carrying out the day-to-day responsibilities on that. So really think a lot. I really like that graphic. It's a great graphic to show what the roles should be. Okay, so how do we establish expectations? So first, I'm going to talk about Landwehr's rule. Landwehr's rules. So who's Landwehr? Landwehr is John Landwehr, who was the mayor in Jeff City for, I don't remember exactly how long, but when I first became an attorney 20 years ago, he was the mayor in Jeff City, when I would do work for them at that point. And John Landwehr was actually known to be a really good mayor and had a great set of philosophy, and it's something that we like to share. And so I'm just going to read these actually for you, because these are in John's words, not mine. But I think it's an interesting approach to being the mayor and kind of working through. So John would say, board meetings are for final position statements, debate, and voting, not for rolling out novel ideas to make everyone think you're a stud. If you vote against a measure and lose, briefly state why you disagreed and drop it after 24 hours, it's old news. Don't keep it in your arsenal for 2 years to justify other actions. If somebody disagrees with you, don't take it personally. Maybe on this issue, you simply had your head up your butt. It happens once in a while to us all. Even if they deserve it, do not publicly criticize the integrity or intentions of a fellow office holder or staff person. Disagree with ideas, not people. Preface statements of disagreement with an acknowledgement of the other person's perspective. Ditto for private statements because they're just as important. Don't play gotcha with staff. If you have a concern about something, discuss it with someone in advance of any public statements. They make mistakes, so do you. Public statements should consist of recommended policy changes to fix the problem. If you find a problem and want to talk about it publicly, have a solution ready. You will be asked for one. Learn how to tell constituents you disagree with them. They'll respect you for it. Don't be a wimp. Each vote deserves your independent analysis and your vote. Anyone who trades votes doesn't deserve to hold office. Allow measures to be considered on their merits. If you want to play parliamentary games to sabotage a bill, run for higher office, you're much too sophisticated for us. And don't build private alliances with segments of staff. It's destructive. So again, that was John Landwehr's take on, the roles between elected officials and staff members and how to approach office. So what are some expectations of elected officials? First of all, you should understand the responsibilities of your public office. Understand your roles. That's part of why we're talking about this stuff today. You need to comply with the law. Make sure that you understand what the law is and that what you're doing is in compliance with that. And that's something that we work with you on all the time. Practice good behavior. Do your duties. Perform the duties you've been asked to perform. Participate in public meetings. Be effective in your communication. Avoid conflicts of interest. We talked about conflicts of interest and what they are at the last meeting or the last training. Deny gifts, gratuities, and favors. Keep confidential information confidential. Again, that one I'll just kind of say is this goes back to an individual alderman has very little power on their own. All of the power rests with the full board. Okay. Certain things are allowed to be kept confidential, whether it's through the Sunshine Law or maybe through attorney-client privilege or things like that, and individuals do not have the ability on their own to override, what has been deemed to be confidential by the board by going into, a closed session, for example, or, having a closed memo, and you cannot waive, the attorney-client privilege individually. That's something that you have to do as a group in that circumstance. Make prudent use of public resources. Be cautious when you're speaking on behalf of the city or sometimes when you're appearing to speak on behalf of the city. Respect and adhere to the city administrator form of government and help to foster a positive workplace environment. So those are some expectations of elected officials. What kind of expectations would staff members or should staff members have of board members? Make sure that as a board member for your staff that you prepare for meetings by reading all the reports and ordinances on the agenda. There's a reason that you get a packet ahead of time so you can have that information. And we talked before about playing gotcha. If you see something and there's a question that you have, don't wait until the meeting to ask because sometimes the question that either it's an honest mistake or it's something that got overlooked or maybe there's a better explanation as to that, and that clues in staff to be able to correct the information or be prepared to give you supplemental information to do a better job of explaining it in the public. If you ask at the night of the meeting, why is this or why is that, when you've had the packet information for a couple of days ahead of time, they may have to stand there and really truly look like a deer in the headlights because dang, if I had only known you were going to ask this question, I could have done the research and gotten it, but I can't stand here at this podium and answer that question now without, giving that. Or, there may be a situation where there is another side to the story, and, we want to be respectful of our constituents, and you're not going to, want to drag a constituent through the mud over a particular issue. So I'm not going to say that, or staff members not going to say that in a public meeting, but they might tell you privately, here's what's going on with that. And, if you just had that piece of information, you might feel differently about the issue that you've pointed out. So again, whenever possible, call staff with your questions before the meeting so questions can be researched and shared during the meeting. Examine all the facts on a given issue and make the best decision possible. We talked about that before. Our role as staff is to make sure that we provide you with everything you need to know, that we certainly that we think you would want to know beforehand. But if we've missed something, let us know so we can supplement that. Do not ridicule or make light of the staff in public. Instead, provide criticism in private. Criticism should be made through the city administrator. Be cautious of that. We'll talk about some more nuclear things that I have seen happen in cities as we get further into this training this evening. But you do have to be careful. There is there's a prohibition in most cities, and there is one in Branson as well, against interference. So as a board member, that structure that we talked about with the mayor and the city administrator being over, the employees, if you've got an issue with an individual employee, do not approach the employee directly. Do that through the mayor and the city administrator. And I'll cover that in a little bit more detail in a minute. Do not assume that staff is wrong and the citizen is right when there is a disagreement. Compliment staff when and where appropriate. Trust and respect the staff. If the council or the board, in this case, disagrees with a staff recommendation, explain your reasoning, and there may be something that was missed in that circumstance. Don't hold a grudge if you disagree with a staff recommendation, and act in a fair, ethical, and consistent manner in everything that you do in office. Likewise, though, board members should have expectation of staff, right? And so, for your expectations, what we would recommend is that you should expect your staff to be well organized and anticipate the type and kind of information that you will need to do your duties, okay? If you have a situation where staff has kind of let you down, if you will, or they didn't provide you with the information, be sure to provide that feedback, because hopefully they're always analyzing that and saying, okay, I understand what Alderman Cooper may want or Alderman Fenton may want on these types of issues, and so I'd be thinking that way, and how do I bring that forward? Staff should always respond to requests for information in a timely and professional manner. Staff should prepare accurate, well-documented, and well-written reports that, where appropriate, lay out the options for the board to consider. It shouldn't just be the staff says, this is the way you have to go, because you have discretion as elected officials, to make choices based on that. So I'm a huge proponent of, I always like to have at least 3 options. There's the super conservative option, there's the middle of the road option, and then there's the super kind of maybe risky option that you could take, and that way, and you think about what are the consequences of each in that circumstance. Staff should be providing exhibits, illustrations, or pictures to help you visualize the location or layout of proposals. If they're out there on the ground doing what they're doing, they're used to saying, we're going to go out to the old Potter place and da-da-da, I don't know if you're going to know that or not. I know certainly when I'm sitting up there, I don't always know that, and it's good to have that, that illustration to understand, where we're talking about various items. Staff should leave personal or political bias out of their reports and their recommendations to you. They should help to orient new members of the board and provide actual educational opportunities for all members. Staff should be accessible to the aldermen, whether in person, at meetings, or over the phone, keeping in mind, that be careful not to do interference, right? Keep all aldermen equally informed. Do not show favoritism. That is something that staff should never do. It's always best to send something to the board as a whole. Now, back to our sunshine law training, though, be extra cautious. If we're sending out an email that goes to the entire board, do not reply to all to that email, Because as soon as you start to do that, now we've created an electronic meeting that wasn't noticed up under the Sunshine Law. So email, I think, is the best way to push out information uniformly so you all see the same thing at one time, but it should be a one-way form of communication. If you have responses to that, then your individual response should be to the mayor or the city administrator to carry that back so that we don't run into that serial meeting problem or where we've created, a quorum without notice. Staff should make the board's decision work after it's made. That kind of gets to the point that you were raising before. If the board has given direction, then staff's responsibility is to carry it out. And staff should always also act in a fair, ethical, and consistent manner. Okay, so now we start to get into the stuff, where things kind of go wrong and what we can do about it. So, gosh, I hate all these animations. Too far. Okay, so what causes difficult board members? Well, sometimes, a difficult board member may not actually be a difficult board member. Maybe they're an indication that political winds are shifting, okay? So that's something that's important for everybody to keep in mind and keep in context because, a member that is kind of, bucking the trend, and I'm a huge fan. I don't like to see a board that is always in lockstep and is always voting unanimously because it just looks weird to me, right? There should be some discussion. There should be some hard decisions. There should be some votes that are split votes, right? And because I feel like that is a board that's operating, at its full potential. But keep in mind, that just because someone sees something differently, may not be, they're being contrarian or they're being difficult, but they're representing, constituents that put them in office that have a different feeling, about that. What else can cause difficult board members? Sometimes there can be inappropriate expectation of what the role of a board member is. We talked about that earlier. The board works as a group, not individually. And I will say that in, the 20 years that I've been doing that, that's probably the thing that I recognize the most. And, like every year, this is kind of at its peak right after April because we got new people that came in and, like, who knows, like half the time it's like, somebody, runs for office because, they got a ticket, for parking in their lawn and they're going to come and, get vindicated about that by being an alderman, and, I don't know whether that's a really good reason to run for alderman or not, but it happens all the time. But keep in mind, that when you're a board member, you are a part of a group, and the reason I think that the structure is built the way it is for boards of aldermen is that we don't have very hugely abrupt swings of the pendulum. Essentially, we move through different more fluidly different types of policy as the city advances in its own existence and its experience. Sometimes campaign promises can get us in trouble. I see a lot of times, like, I'll hear people that are running for office and they're like, I'm going to go in and clean out City Hall. They're all a bunch of bums, like whatever. And so, but, what I typically do find is a lot of times when people are saying that kind of stuff, when I hear about it in February and March and into April, as people get elected, they get in and then by June or July, they kind of like, oh, okay, well, people here are really, they're good people and they're trying to do the right thing. And, I didn't realize it didn't quite work that way. And so then they start to feel a little bit more different. They start to feel differently about those types of thoughts. Keep in mind, too, that if you're that person that's out stumping for office and you're saying, like everybody in here is a bum and, you get in, these are all the people that you're going to be working with, at this point. So something to keep in mind there. I think it's important that local government is local. We shouldn't have national issues bleeding in. We've had discussions about that here about, what do we truly have the authority to work on and what don't we have the authority to work on. And we need to, do a good job ourselves as, making sure that the city's resources are expended on local issues, not things that are beyond our control. Sometimes it's an urge to fix things. That's kind of that hand up the pipe issue, is again, keep in mind when you come in as an alderman, as an elected official, as the legislative body, you're setting policy, you're not doing the doing. And a failure to understand the board and administrator relationship, really it's truly I could say it this way too, the legislature versus the administration relationship, not understanding the boundaries between those. Playing games with withholding votes, doing abstentions or recusals have to have, really a basis, like where you're either going to be committing nepotism or some sort of conflict or interest. Because again, we've talked before about there is a duty to vote when you've been elected by your constituents to do that. And sometimes fear causes difficult board members, and they fear that, either way that they vote, they, would be unpopular, and so they're cautious or don't want to vote at all. So what are characteristics of difficult board members? Good Lord, why did I do this? And I used Jeff Foxworthy because the first couple times I actually gave this presentation, it's kind of like, it starts to sound like you might be a redneck if, and it's like, you might be a bad board member if you're interfering with employees. Again, as a legislator, you're setting policy, you're not doing the day-to-day, so stay out of the employee's business. That is something that should be handled through the mayor and the city administrator. If you're demanding special access, you might be a bad board member. If you treat every staff presentation as an inquisition of some sort, and you're trying to grill the staff members, that's not a great face. If you're disclosing confidential information to the media or anybody, really, for that matter, it doesn't really matter, whether it's the media or just private individuals or, make some people feel like they have some sort of extra access or something like that. Those are bad things because, again, we've talked about the fact that individuals on this body do not have the authority to make confidential information known. If you spend all your time on minutia or miss the big picture completely, kind of what it is that we're trying to do, that makes for a difficult board member. If you're not prepared for meetings or regularly ask questions that were answered in the board packet. I don't know how many times I've sat at a meeting in my career and like literally hear the staff say, da 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 da, and then 30 seconds later a board member says, well, what about this? And I'm like, wow, they just said that. It's like, so it makes you wonder sometimes. So try not to be that person. If you're never willing to bring closure and always want more information before voting, and again, I'll like if you're using the need for more information to delay a vote, that's different from saying I didn't have enough information to fully understand this matter to vote. There is a line that can be drawn there, and so be cautious about that. If you refuse to abide by the meeting rules of order, that's going to be a problematic situation. If you circumvent the manager or the city administrator going instead to internal staff, that's what interference is. That's a problem. And if you try to make the staff and the city administrator or fellow elected officials look bad, you may be a difficult board member. So if we've got that, what do we do? First, make sure that if you're working with a difficult alderperson that you exercise emotional maturity and intelligence. Try to stay professional. Do not appear that you made anything personal. That kind of goes back, you go back and read Landwehr's rules. He talks about that. Don't take anything, on that we do here personally. This is truly, it's business when we get down to it. Hold firm to required positions, but in a way that does not communicate personal animosity. Try to keep communication lines open. It won't be helpful to shut down communication with the individual, even though the individual may choose to do so. Keep the situation in perspective. Do your best to insulate staff from negative conduct to the greatest extent possible. Help the board and staff stay focused on the work of the organization and those goals and that policy and that we addressed, back, if you remember, back to the airplane landing. And accept that sometimes the best you may be able to do is minimize the negative consequences of the outlier's conduct. And so I didn't talk about this before, but the genesis of this actual presentation, I had a city, one of my clients, come to me about 2 years ago and said, what we really need to have some sort of, a piece that educates, our board on, what are the proper roles of board versus staff, because it was one of those cities where, all of the elected officials had their arm up a pipe in one way or another. And, so that's where that kind of came from. And so I've done this presentation probably 15 times in the last 2 years since then. In fact, if you're going to, I hope you do go to the MML conference, the annual conference in Kansas City this year. I will actually be giving this presentation there as well, as I've been asked by the City Managers Association to do this one there. But that's kind of where it came from that standpoint. But so going on then, how do we, one of the things you can do is to make sure that you're using procedural rules to control the meeting. So keep in mind, Mayor, you are the presiding officer and you should keep order in the meetings. And sometimes we're talking about order up here and sometimes we're talking about order out here. Don't allow board members to speak unless they're recognized, and don't allow the public to interrupt. Make sure that motions are being made before discussion. Hillary's really great about this. She is really excellent at her parliamentary procedure. And it's important, you are a legislature. You've got to bring a matter to the floor to start discussing it before you do business on it. If it doesn't make it to the floor, then it's not even something that you're considering, right? Roll call votes force commitment, but what I will tell you is, as we know, that for ordinances, roll call votes are required. You guys have, historically you've done them up on the board, and then more recently we've been doing them, just lost track of how we're doing that right now, so.
Their voice.
Voice vote, yeah. Okay, so stick to the agenda. Items that are not on the agenda should be taken up at another meeting, or they should be voted on to add to the agenda. And board comments should be comments, not motions to kind of, move an item that wasn't on the agenda. So kind of like don't tag something on to just your comments. So what do we do about really, really bad behavior? So a couple of these, situations that require action. So if we have a situation where sexual harassment is occurring, and sometimes that comes from elected officials, call the city attorney, follow your personnel policies, talk with your human resources manager on that. If we have criminal activities, call the police, right? If we have ethics situations, we need to contact the ethics commission. I would also say contact the city attorney, because we've talked before about, whether there's a legal conflict or not, and how to address those. If there's nepotism, we talked about this last time as well. There is, do not pass go, do not collect $200. You're out of office on those. So be very cautious whenever you're looking to hire someone that you may be related to. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about the nuclear option because I'm running short on time here. So there are various levels of intervention that you may incur if you've got individuals who are difficult to deal with. And so personal intervention, certainly, one way to do it is just have a one-on-one. So like if you have somebody that is being difficult, you can always kind of say, hey, I noticed that, kind of always against this or always against that, or, like whatever, is there anything we can do to help, get involved that way? Sometimes you solicit help from the outside, maybe you have a facilitator that comes in. Sometimes there's formal and outside intervention. So formal intervention or could be, whether, the board makes a formal complaint against one of its members, even a censure. Unfortunately, in the 20 years that I've been doing this, I've had to do a lot of censures, where it's kind of like, a board has to kind of call one of their own into line. And I would say even more, unfortunately, is it seems like in the last maybe 6 years, it's ticked up for whatever reason. I don't know why. Maybe just it seems like, people are less civil in general in more recent years, and maybe that has something to do with it. Sometimes you need to do an investigation. Maybe you have a third party that comes in and takes a look at certain issues. And then if you do a censure, it does require a majority vote of the council. It's not a supermajority, and it can be public or private. It is private, but subject to the Sunshine Law. So, that if a censure occurs, it will be disclosable, so it's not super private. The really nuclear option is impeachment. And so that bottom picture there, you can see the man with the blue shirt and the pink tie to the left is the attorney for the woman that's sitting there. And she was a city council member in the city of O'Fallon, Missouri. We were hired as special counsel by the city of O'Fallon to do an impeachment of Katie Gatewood. That's the woman that is in the picture there. And In that circumstance, Ms. Gatewood was ultimately brought up on charges of interference. There were several counts of interference in the situation that the facts lay out. The case is now over, so I can talk about it. But in the facts of the case, the city council, they had 10 members, and they voted to hire a police chief. And in the night that they hired the police chief, the vote was 7-3 to hire the chief. Ms. Gatewood and 2 of her colleagues were the nay votes on that. Ms. Gatewood did not like that decision. She was against that decision. And instead of letting it go and being on the losing end of a 7-3 vote, she took it into her own hands to do a separate investigation of the police chief, which included calling the Texas Rangers, the Texas Attorney General, and the former bosses and elected officials of the town where the police chief came from. All of this got back to the city in that circumstance, and ultimately an impeachment hearing was held, evidence was had, and the city council voted to impeach and remove Ms. Gatewood from office. And it ended up on appeal in the 8th Circuit, and we just finally got a decision on it 2 years later from the 8th Circuit that finalized everything. So, I don't know if we're past the point where it could go to the United States Supreme Court at this point, but that's the only place it could go at this point. So, like I said, unfortunately, I've had the experience to do this. We've impeached, probably 6 or 10 public officials. The worst one I ever had was a mayor who actually pulled a gun on city employees on 2 different occasions, where we actually had to impeach and remove a mayor from office for that. So, see, Larry's not so bad after all.
Hey, Joe.
Yes.
Okay. So impeachment, does it work similar to the way it works on the national level in that it's sort of a political action? It doesn't have to take like a breaking of a law. It's more, can be like the opinion of the board. Is that?
So the way at least, I don't know that it's different at the federal level or not, but impeachment itself is actually the process to consider whether it's essentially the bringing of charges, to have a hearing, to put someone on notice that they have, that there's, a very deep investigation into whether someone should be removed from office. It ends up being a fact-finding hearing. If the facts are there, then findings of fact are developed, and then conclusions of law are drafted, and it's approved. It's kind of an interesting process where the Board of Aldermen ultimately sits as a panel of judges, and you weigh the evidence and you make a determination as to what evidence is there, and then if the evidence is there, then the question is that a violation, of the statute? So impeachment is the process. The action that can come of it is removal from office. So I think hopefully that is a way to understand the distinction between the two. You can have an impeachment without a removal from office. You cannot have a removal from office without an impeachment. Okay. I guess I just covered that. Yep. So, all right. So what are, not to end on a bummer note, so let's talk about, how good boards have good meetings. So first of all, you always want your meetings to be smooth and productive. Staff should let the board know when controversial issues are coming up so that you don't get blindsided. Staff should give enough information so that you can make an informed decision, but not so much information that they're essentially inviting you to micromanage. We should do the math, calculate totals. Staff, again, should calculate totals, create bid tables, show salary ranges, give you, the information that you need in order to make your decision. To have good meetings, you should always follow your agenda, follow a good procedure, also helps in creating minutes. And, and we do this well, sometimes staff can gently, assist to help correct that procedure, or to keep it on the tracks. Staff should not invite the board to micromanage. So if like in my graphic here is, if the public says to the board, we need a place, we need a new police station, a new fire station, we need a new park, whatever it is, right? That message gets to you. You set the policy and you say, we need a place. So your response to staff is that little arrow that says, do it, right? And at that point, your job is kind of done. So staff should go through then and carry out that directive from you, right? but they should not be coming back to you then and asking a whole bunch of questions about it, kind of essentially inviting you to stick your arm up the pipe, right? So again, so in order to affect good government, we all have to work together and understand our roles and responsibilities, especially between elected officials and staff, to make sure that we're being the most efficient that we can possibly be. Board member decorum. Always be polite, show respect to other board members, the staff, and the audience. You should always address the chair and always use titles or last names. I mean, that's, probably, you set the tone of your decorum when you're up there, right? And so, if you have that consistent rule of, the comments are to the mayor, and it's not, like I shouldn't even address Alderman Fenton directly, right? It should be to the mayor and say, Mayor, I have a question of Alderman Fenton or something like that. Or, I have a question, it is asked to you, and then you'll ask Alderman Fenton if he would like to respond, and you control that. So that's a good way to go. Make sure you turn on your microphone when you speak. You're leaning forward that people can hear. Remember, we're streaming. People in the audience need to be able to hear what you're saying. Make sure you turn it off when you're done and speak so the audience can hear, and don't have side conversations. I sit in a lot of meetings, and a lot of times I'll see, aldermen talking to each other or whatever, and I'll always see like people leaning forward trying to hear, don't do that. That's kind of disrespectful to the people that are out there. And if you need to call a point of order and just ask a question, do that, if that's appropriate there. Make sure you pay attention to the speaker. Don't be looking at your phones. We talked to the last time about how you can sometimes have electronic meetings while you're having a physical meeting. Don't be doing that. Nobody wants to see you type on your phone and then see the person down here going, like whatever, because you can tell that they're talking to each other. Okay. Gosh darn it, it was 5 minutes over. Sorry about that. I had a lot of questions at the beginning.
Sure, blame the board.
Pretty much the mayor and marshal.
I was trying to give you the information you needed to make your decisions.
Good questions, though.
I am happy to answer any questions, but I know that, you need a break before start the regular meeting. So, and I am going to do what I did last time, and that is I'm going to share this training with you, and then I'm going to go on towards Springfield this evening, and Holly will be taking over and covering the meeting. And we've talked before about the fact that, my role as the interim is to get us up and running, to get staff. So Holly has been essentially embedded with the city staff now since the middle of July. And we're at a point now where Holly is going to take over the day-to-day actions as the city attorney. She's close by here, and she's coming from our Springfield office. So we cut out, Kathy can attest, we cut out the bills for, the long drive here and things like that. I've already seen the bills starting to drop, so this is exactly what we were heading towards from that standpoint. So you're in very able hands with Holly, but I'm always a phone call away if you need anything. And I will remain in the role for, as I had been in the past with the city, where I'll do your economic development stuff. So we have a ton of projects working on, so this is not the last you've seen of me. But Holly will start covering the more regular meetings for you all. And thank you again for the opportunity that I've been able to spend with you guys for the last 5 months. I've worked for the city of Branson for a very long time, like 15 years, I think, of the 20 I've been doing this. And the energy that I feel when I come in this building with what you guys have going on, this staff is I get goosebumps thinking about it. This is, it feels different when I walk in, and that's a tremendous statement, I think, to all of your leadership and pulling this group together. And you've got some folks who are just out there killing it for you, and the sky's the limit for Branson. I'm so excited to be able to share your story when I'm talking to other cities out there, because it's a good one. So thank you.
Thank you very much for saying that. And I can speak firsthand. I've had quite a few interactions with Holly, and boy, what a treat to work with. Seriously, professional, very knowledgeable. I don't think Joe's going to be missed. Oh, wait a minute. That was probably one of the things you don't say.
Your mic was on.
Yeah.
No jokes, that was also in his thing.
Oh, yeah. Any aldermen have any comments?
Thank you, Joe. That was very informative.
Yes.
My pleasure, thank you.
Oops. So, do I have a motion to adjourn the study session?
Second?
Boy, that was quick. Let's vote. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. Ayes have it, meeting's adjourned.